Welcome everyone to the Boltathon, the world's first Lightning Network conference and hackathon. I'm excited to introduce to you Trey Griffith. He is the founder of sparkswap, and his topic is going to be atomic swaps on Lightning.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. Thanks everyone for joining. As Andrew mentioned, I'm the founder of sparkswap, which is a non-custodial cryptocurrency exchange that supports Bitcoin and uses Lightning Network atomic swaps to actually settle the trades. That means you can trade without trusting us, without trusting your counterparties, but still use real Bitcoin and have trades settle in just a few seconds. And the talk that I'm going to be giving today is about Lightning Network atomic swaps, which is the technology that sparkswap builds on to make this product possible. So I'll just go ahead and jump right into it here. All right. So, cross-chain atomic swaps on Lightning. That's the foundational technology we use. And what I'm going to be talking about today, there's a few topics. First, why do we even care about this? That's the main thing. And then go through a little bit of the history of atomic swaps, including on-chain swaps, early Lightning Network atomic swaps, submarine swaps, the specific construction we use, which we could call cross-network preimage retrieval. And then we'll also talk a little bit about new features in LND, including the HODL invoice feature, which simplifies this a little bit. And we'll go into, if we have some time, sort of like remaining areas of research for us and for the community at large. So with that, let's get into, let's get into why you should care about this. So first of all, I think the main thing is you paid to see a talk about atomic swaps on Lightning, so you clearly care at least a little bit about this topic. You're interested in it. For me, it really comes down to kind of two aspects. One is when you think about non-custodial trading, the first piece of that is, non-custodial, not having to trust a third party with custody of your assets. To me, that's a big part of what Bitcoin and Lightning are about. And so, it's important to have services and software that kind of allow you to keep control of your assets. The second is, the second part of non-custodial trading is really the trading part of it. And I would argue, I think probably pretty successfully, that trading is an essential part of any financial system. And so, if we can't trade non-custodially, it's going to be very hard to build a financial system that allows us to interact in a non-custodial manner. To get more sort of granular on the custody aspect, with Bitcoin, if you don't own the keys, you really don't own the Bitcoin. There's a bunch of ways to secure your Bitcoin where you can still retain your keys, including multi-sig wallets, hardware wallets. But ultimately, if they're held with somebody else, if they're held, by some third party where you don't have access to them, it's really not Bitcoin for you. More practically speaking, over $1 billion has been stolen from exchanges because people have to hold their assets there in order to trade. Also, if you don't live in the same country that your exchange is, you might not be comfortable with kind of the rules and regulations in that country, which could lead to your assets being seized or frozen. And then kind of more day to day, a lot of people have issues with delayed withdrawals on exchanges. An exchange is sort of pretty willing to take your deposits, but at times can be pretty slow to give your money back to you, which is a little bit ridiculous when it's really, at the end of the day, it's your money. There are a lot of other solutions to this problem of custody, but a lot of them look pretty similar to our existing system. So there have been a lot of announcements about custody providers partnering with centralized exchanges, so you don't have to pull your money out of the custody provider in order to trade it. That's great. I think those are good developments, but ultimately those are really just rebuilding some of the same structures that we've had in the past. They rely on trusted relationships between large institutions. They probably eventually end up relying on regulations of those institutions. And, for you, the user, it comes down to, you can trust us. You can trust us as an institution that we have your best interests at heart. Maybe most of the time that's true, and I think our existing financial system has served us well. But I think we all agree here that we can do better, and that by building on, Bitcoin, we can build a financial system that doesn't require that type of structure. So, this is I think an opportunity. Non-custodial trading is an opportunity to start from a new and better foundation. The other kind of argument for this, I think a lot of people who are in the Bitcoin ecosystem might kind of say, why do I want to trade my Bitcoin for anything? Especially kind of in the kind of altcoin mania that can exist at times. It seems like the only use for trading Bitcoin is to trade it for, these other kind of speculative cryptocurrencies. And I think that's a fair argument, but I think in the long run, if you look at the world before Bitcoin, multiple financial assets exist. Even if there is going to be a single global money, which I'm not positive of, other financial assets exist. Things like debt, things like equity, real estate, commodities. These assets exist in the real world, not to mention, multiple derivatives. And I think we can all agree, or hopefully we can all agree, that if those assets look more like Bitcoin rather than less, that's better. The technology is better. Hopefully sort of the rights that it gives people are better. And so, as a result, I think that we can anticipate a future where trading these assets, these financial assets, is a fundamental part of our financial system. And that, in the future, exchanging these assets is just as important as transacting for other goods. And so to me, I think trading is an essential building block, an essential piece of infrastructure for us to build. And having it be built in a way that's sort of native to Bitcoin, I think is a really critical part of that. So let's start at the very beginning, which is on-chain atomic swaps. I think probably most people in this session know a little bit about these, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. But they are sort of an important building block for everything else we're going to talk about. So on-chain atomic swaps, as far as I know, they were first written down by a Bitcoin Talk user named Tier Nolan in 2013. And they were made quite a bit simpler by the addition of the check lock time verify opcode in 2015. This is a basic construction that I'm going to go through. It doesn't go into sort of the nitty gritty of the actual opcodes that you need, but it will give you a pretty good image of how an on-chain swap works. So in this picture, we've got two parties. We've got Alice and Bob, our initiating party, Alice, and then Bob, who I call our translating party, the person that's kind of translating the swap from one chain to another. So Alice starts by creating a secret and then hashing that secret. And she uses that hash to create a payment to Bob that can only be redeemed by Bob if he has the secret that Alice generated. So this is a conditional payment. And it is, for those of you familiar, this is in most cases a hash time lock contract. So Bob can redeem it with the preimage to the hash, but if he doesn't after a certain period of time, then Alice can redeem it after the timeout is done. And so this is on the first blockchain. This is, on, let's say, Bitcoin. And at that point, once that transaction has confirmed, Bob can create another transaction on a second blockchain. Let's call that Litecoin, where he pays Alice with the same condition. In order for Alice to redeem the payment in Litecoin, she needs to reveal the secret to the hash. And the same timeout applies, where Bob can redeem this payment if Alice doesn't reveal the hash before the timeout. So now we have a situation where Alice can reveal the secret and redeem her Litecoin payment. But in so doing, she reveals the secret to Bob because it's published on the blockchain. and Bob can use it to redeem his payment of Bitcoin. So that's why we call this an atomic swap. There's no way for Alice to redeem her payment without simultaneously giving Bob what he needs to redeem his payment. But if Alice chooses not to redeem it, nothing happens. So either the swap happens or it doesn't. There's no sort of like halfway point where the swap, halfway completed and somebody is losing money. Now the timeout difference is important here because Bob needs to have sufficient time between when his payment times out and when Alice's payment times out, because there is sort of an attack if the timeouts are the same, where Alice can try to redeem the Litecoin payment and revoke her Bitcoin payment at the same time, and Bob can end up, losing some money. So Bob needs to have a gap between when his payment times out and when Alice's payment to him times out. This is pretty good. It's a really cool construction, but I think that the question that you should be asking is like, okay, well then why aren't there huge exchanges where people are doing on-chain atomic swaps? Obviously there's no way to really know, but I think some problems with this construction that have prevented it from being very successful are largely around the amount of time that it takes for this to happen. So, Bob, if he wants to be safe, shouldn't publish his Litecoin transaction until he is confident that Alice's Bitcoin transaction has been confirmed. So, Bob probably wants to wait 6 blocks or an hour before publishing his side of the transaction. If Alice and Bob really do things quickly, maybe they can get the whole thing done in an hour. Perhaps Alice will want to wait another confirmation block for Bob's payment before revealing the secret. And so as a result, you've got this, you've got a pretty long process to settle the payments. And not only is this sort of long process inconvenient, it also means that because this is an atomic swap, if the prices move at all during that period of time, someone, either Alice or Bob, is going to be incentivized to back out of the trade. So, Bob, he's waiting for an hour for this payment to be confirmed. If the price moves against him, maybe he says, okay, what, I'm not gonna do this trade. He backs out. Alice actually has even more power. As soon as Bob publishes his payment, she can wait up until Bob's payment is about to time out to decide whether she wants to complete the payment. So really, okay, what is this good for? I think mostly it would be useful for high value, large payments where the parties aren't super concerned with small price movements. But, if you look at the ecosystem today, most of those payments are happening right now through OTC desks. There's trusted relationships involved anyway. And so this is just a lot of overhead for kind of very little benefit. But I think it's still promising. For those of you who follow, Lightning and understand the internals, which if you've been to some of the other sessions, you probably do, you'll notice that this looks a lot like a Lightning payment. Like if you unwrap this, and rather than having the second leg of the payment go to the same user on a different blockchain, it goes to a different user on the same blockchain. That's basically a Lightning payment. That's a multi-hop Lightning payment. But instead of these conditional payments, these HTLCs happening on chain, they're happening inside a payment channel so that you don't have to settle them on chain. And so that's a pretty interesting way to think about an atomic swap and a pretty interesting way to think about a Lightning payment because, okay, if a Lightning payment is just an unrolled atomic swap cross-chain, well, what if we re-roll it but inside payment channels? And that's what an atomic swap on Lightning is. It's just a multi-hop Lightning payment that has the first leg of the hop on one blockchain, the second leg of the hop on a second blockchain. But they're both in payment channels, and the second leg of the hop happens to go back to the same user that initiated it. I think that this is the easiest way. This is actually when I first started getting into this, this is the way Connor explained it to me. He said, it's a circular payment. That's all you need to think of it as is a circular payment. And I think that is by far the best way to understand a cross-chain atomic swap on Lightning, is just a circular Lightning payment where the destination and the origin are the same. So this graph, and this is sort of a representation of an atomic swap on Lightning, basically as it was demonstrated by Connor and Lightning Labs in late 2017. I think it was November of 2017, where each of these, user A and user B, are each running a version of LND that has both Bitcoin and Litecoin at the same time. And so the first payment, on blockchain 1 there is in Bitcoin. The second payment is in Litecoin. And so, both parties are operating on both networks, and they're able to sort of seamlessly swap Bitcoin for Litecoin. And that works. It does have some problems. You can sort of start to imagine where this goes, because Bitcoin and Litecoin are pretty similar. But it is quite difficult to run both of them on both chains in the same node at the same time. And once you start including kind of other assets that maybe are a little bit less similar than Litecoin, you can really start to see how the complexity kind of explodes. Trying to support 3 or 4 different assets in the same piece of software is quite difficult. Also, because what we're using here is the actual multi-hop functionality of Lightning, both parties need to be on both networks, which means they need to be on as many networks as they want to trade on. And it requires that both networks are compatible at kind of the payment channel network layer. So if the Litecoin Lightning Network for some reason lacked a feature of the Bitcoin Lightning Network, this wouldn't work. So it's a good start, but it doesn't really get us where we want to go, which is interoperability, simplicity, and while still retaining the same non-custodial fast settlement. Because that's really what this gives us. This is a way to trade without custody between these two parties. They don't trust each other, but the trade settles in a second. So that takes us to submarine swaps, which I think a lot of people are actually. Before I do that, Andrew, before I move to submarine swaps, where things are about to get really dicey, any questions I can answer on atomic swaps or atomic swaps on Lightning?
There's not actually any questions right now.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions, drop them in the chat or use the Q&A function, and I can send it to Trey. I actually have one.
Sure. Yeah.
So
go.
Oh wait. I guess one question is, can people track this? So I guess, can people track atomic swaps on the specific Lightning network?
So just like a Lightning payment, there's sort of built-in privacy when it comes to an atomic swap on Lightning that you lack a little bit when you're talking about on-chain transactions. So just like a Lightning payment, you can track them if you're in the path of the payment. And so in theory, if you were in the path of the payment on both chains, you might be able to detect that, okay, this is an atomic swap happening because there's a payment on Bitcoin and Litecoin for the same hash. But if you're not in the payment path, there's really no way for you to know about this swap at all. So it has a lot of privacy built in, just like Lightning payments. Okay,
so this is kind of funny. Is this the end of chain analysis?
I doubt it. I think Lightning is a really good privacy preserving technology for sure. I still, there's a lot of sort of like work ongoing to further improve the privacy of Lightning, to do things like make it less obvious when you're opening or closing a Lightning channel. But certainly for some of these transactions, you can eliminate at least some sort of transparency in some of these transactions. So I think that's an improvement.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay, cool. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about submarine swaps. So submarine swaps, for people that don't know, are a way to trade on-chain Bitcoin for Bitcoin in Lightning channels. And for those of you that have worked with Lightning at all, you know that this is pretty valuable because you can open a channel with a certain amount of money, but let's say you spend that money on, I don't know, Lightning Koala games or something like that. You'll still have a channel open, but all of the capacity will be on your counterparty side. And so, you might want to increase the capacity back on your side again. You can close the channel and reopen it. That's a possibility, but that requires 2 on-chain transactions, so it can be sort of expensive. An alternative that you have is using a submarine swap. So you can send on-chain an on-chain transaction that refills your side of a payment channel. And it does this by using a swap provider. So what I would do, Alice, the initiating party, would use, in this case, our swap provider, Bob, and sends an on-chain transaction. This is just like our on-chain atomic swap, where it's an HTLC that says, okay, Bob, I will pay you, I'll pay you, X Bitcoin if you reveal the secret for this hash. And Bob, rather than, putting the other half of this transaction on chain on a different chain, actually just sends it to your Lightning node and says, I'll give you, I'll give you X minus whatever my fee is, Bitcoin, in your Lightning channel if you can reveal the secret. And since Alice was the one that initiated this in the first place, she knows the secret. Ideally, the easiest way to do this is to have her Lightning node actually generate that secret to begin with in an invoice. And so her Lightning node settles that payment. Bob can then, the swap provider in this case, can then use that secret to redeem the on-chain payment. So this is a really great way to refill Lightning channels. And this is actually, I think, pretty much Lightning Loop. I think this specific graph is, I think, what's called Lightning Loop in, where you're refilling channels using an on-chain transaction. But it's just a submarine swap. Submarine swap because you're going from on-chain to off-chain. So the reason that's important for us is that actually that was, largely the inspiration for the way that we do Lightning Network atomic swaps. We call it specifically cross-network pre-image retrieval. The reason we call it cross-network is you can use it to do swaps between 2 networks that aren't strictly speaking compatible. So Lightning Network and something that looks like Lightning but doesn't exactly meet the spec of Lightning. So it looks really similar. The difference is that rather than doing something on-chain and off-chain, everything is off-chain. So each user is running a payment channel network node for each blockchain they're trading on. So a Litecoin LND and Bitcoin LND, for example. And the initiating party is going to do the same thing they would in a submarine swap. They're going to generate an invoice on their, let's say, Litecoin LND node, and they're going to take the hash of that invoice and send it out of band to their counterparty. And the counterparty is going to create what we call an external preimage invoice in their Bitcoin Lightning node. And all an external preimage invoice is just an invoice that is marked to say, I don't know the preimage for this invoice, but I can get it if I call out to an external service. So it's a preimage that I can get if I use this external service. This is sort of the setup for the swap. And once that's in place, Alice can again make the conditional payment for the hash on the Bitcoin Lightning Network to Bob. Bob's Lightning node, since it knows that this hash is associated with an external preimage, rather than trying to settle it right away, it will hold on to it, and it will request that preimage from a little service that we call an interchain router. And basically this says, hey, I need a preimage for this hash. Where can I get it? And the interchain router will then say, oh, actually, I know that I can get that preimage if I just make a payment on the Litecoin Lightning Network. to a particular node ID. So Bob's Lightning node makes a payment on the Litecoin Lightning Network for the same hash to Alice's Litecoin Lightning node. And at that point, Alice's Litecoin Lightning node, since it's the node that actually created the invoice in the first place, can settle the payment backwards to Bob's Litecoin Lightning node, which can then use the secret to then go back through the interchain router, and then settle the payment on Bitcoin. So you've got here a system that looks a lot like a Lightning swap, but really looks more like a Submarine swap. But instead of having one half of it be on-chain, both parts of it are off-chain. And the advantage that you get there is, again, you reduce the complexity. Rather than having Litecoin and Bitcoin in the same node at the same time, you run two nodes. And maybe that's slightly more expensive computationally, but from a complexity standpoint, it is way easier to maintain. And these networks don't have to be strictly compatible. If there's another payment channel network node or another payment channel network that supports multi-hop payments with locked by SHA-256 hash, it can fit into this network. As long as the interchain router knows how to talk to that node, there's no reason that any other payment channel network can't be included. So I think that's really important, both to sort of increase the range of assets that can be supported, but also to kind of let each of these payment channel networks evolve in whatever way is sort of most beneficial for their use case. We don't want something like Lightning being hamstrung by the slowness of other networks, or vice versa. So I think this presents like a much simpler way of doing things, a much more scalable way of doing things. And actually, this is the structure of the HODL invoice. So we forked LND a long time ago, and now we don't have to anymore, which is great. The HODL invoice is basically what we called an external Preimage invoice. It's an invoice that says to the LND node, I don't have the Preimage yet, but just hold on to this invoice, and I might get it later. I might not, and I might have to cancel it, but I might get the Preimage later. So the structure is really similar. For a HODL invoice, you create the HODL invoice for the hash. Rather than having the LND node call out to the router just listens for updates to the hash, and it actually sends a command either canceling the HTLC or settling it. But this is how you do atomic swaps over Lightning using the HODL invoice feature. And it's useful for more than just atomic swaps. This was mentioned in the HODL invoice pull request, but similarly to how it doesn't really matter if the second blockchain payment channel network is strictly compatible with Lightning, it doesn't have to be a payment channel network at all. It could be verifying that some service was delivered. It could be that you want to make sure that the HTLC to a merchant is locked in before you actually deliver some service, whether it be a video or a game or anything like that. Can all rely on this process of waiting for the payment to be locked in, delivering whatever the service is, and then settling it elsewhere. So I think this is a really cool development. I think it will lead to a ton of new, interesting services. So yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff. Before I go to, I have a little demo. Before I go to that, are there any questions about Submarine swaps, the way we do Lightning swaps, and then also the new HODL invoice feature?
Yeah, actually, one of my questions would be, does the HODL invoice feature help solve anything in regards to like the American call option that people have been talking about?
Definitely not. No, so we'll get to that. Hopefully we'll get to that at the end. Yes, no, the option problem is still there. The HODL invoice feature just makes makes it easier to do to build these cross-chain swaps. This is actually, I think, the HODL invoice feature is what they used to build loop out, which is kind of the reverse of loop in, which I talked about earlier. It just makes it easier to do that, but it doesn't, there's a reason that loop out is a single asset, because it's harder to abuse the option if it's a single asset.
Got it. Yeah, because there's no price fluctuation, I guess.
Yep.
Well, we have another question. How do you decide the exchange rate?
Yeah, so in the case of sparkswap, we operate a trading venue to connect users to settle trades this way. So this is, for us, this is a way to settle a trade that's already been agreed. And so the price is, just decided in the market through an order book the same way it would be on sort of any other trading venue. So we think it's, a good price discovery process, usually a quite efficient price discovery process, but you still get the trade settlement that is, very fast and, without having to trust us with custody of the assets.
And what's great is compare that to an Ethereum DEX or something like that. You actually have to pay to post your orders.
Right.
But with the Lightning Network, you don't, right?
Yeah. That's, so one of the key differences for us with other non-custodial exchanges is basically every non-custodial exchange is at some point on-chain, whether it's on-chain swaps or with a lot of the Ethereum DEXs, it's sort of like off-chain order book, but on-chain settlement. Some of them have their own custom blockchains to do everything. But in our case, because we use Lightning, we can do everything off-chain. So, placing orders, canceling orders, settling trades, it all happens off-chain, which means that everything can happen sort of at a speed that is sufficient for actually trading. We still need to do some optimization, but our trades today execute and settle in 2.5 to 3.5 seconds. And we think we can get that even further down. So, it's a pretty big difference when you compare to other kind of non-custodial exchanges. And it's all just because it's all off-chain.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Great. Well, let me show a little demo. So this is actually the first time we're showing this. This is actually on mainnet, a swap that we did. So I'll kind of walk through this a little bit. What we're seeing here are two users, Alice and Bob, in our case, Chandler and Monica. And in this case, we've got Chandler on the left, and he has some Bitcoin, 0.015 Bitcoin that he would like to exchange for Litecoin. And then Monica in the middle has some Litecoin, 1.77 Litecoin, that she'd like to trade for some Bitcoin. So to do that, all that needs to happen is they both need to, post some orders on sparkswap, and the trade itself will get settled using, an atomic swap over Lightning. So you can see Monica here buying 0.001 Bitcoin at a price of 60 Litecoin per Bitcoin. She places that order. It gets, you can see it show up in the market almost immediately. It gets broadcast out to all the other participants. And then Bob can sell 0.001 Bitcoin. And if he doesn't put in a price, it will just take the best price in the market, which in this case is Monica's order. And even sort of before I can type in this command, the swap has already taken place. So these two users behind the scenes have actually swapped with each other. And you can see that Monica now has 0.001 Bitcoin, and Chandler has 0.001 Bitcoin less, and now has a little bit of Litecoin, so 0.06 Litecoin. So that's what it looks like in practice with SparkSwap today. So if you want to try out, Lightning Network atomic swaps, SparkSwap is a great way to do it. And yeah, if you're interested in using that software, let me know. We're around. We're happy to help people get started with it, especially developers, because our API is sort of our number one priority. So now I'll get into the free option problem, which we talked a little bit about. So I mentioned this when we were talking about on-chain swaps, that, Bob has an opportunity to decide not to complete the trade if the price has moved against him. And Alice, really has an opportunity to do that. Well, with Lightning, you've mitigated the problem because you can trade so quickly that in most cases, both parties should be sort of sufficiently satisfied with the price to execute the trade. The price is just not likely to move much in the half a second that it takes to set up the trade. And so both parties in many cases are going to be just happy to execute the trade at the price they agree. But it is possible for Alice in particular to hold on to the HTLC that was extended and not settle it right away and just wait to see what happens with the prices. And in that case, Alice basically has an option. She has the right, but not the obligation to complete this trade at the agreed price. The problem with this option is that it's free. So Alice did not pay anything to Bob to receive this option. And typically, that's not how it works. In a typical financial market, Alice would pay Bob a premium to trade at this given price. So this has been kind of the source of a lot of consternation, even sort of assertions that that's why you cannot have two assets on the Lightning Network. You can only ever have one. Obviously, we don't agree with that. We think there are some solutions to the free option problem. So some of them that have been kind of discussed, and we can go into more if people are interested, is one of them is making the options not free. So kind of embracing the fact that what you have is actually an option structure and have Alice pay Bob a premium. There are some ways you can set up contracts that make that happen that are a little bit more complicated, hard to do on Lightning, maybe a little bit easier to do on chain. You can also have like an arbiter who sits in the middle who maybe can't cash a payment, but can hold on to an HTLC and not extend it to Bob until Bob actually extends the HTLC to Alice. So there's a few different options you have there for how to make the options not free. I'm sure there are others. One thing that we've experimented with here at sparkswap is bonding. So have each party put up a small fraction of the trade as a bond. And if they only get it back if Bob actually reveals the preimage. So as proof that the trade completed, Bob reveals the preimage. But if he doesn't, then they both lose their deposits. So that's why I call it mutually assured destruction. We've experimented with that. Also, you can have a similar kind of structure with an arbiter who is just sort of deciding whether Bob extended the HTLC in time and whether Alice sort of either rejected it or exercised it within a certain amount of time. You can do a similar scheme like that. There are others that have been discussed. This is definitely an open area of research, but I feel pretty confident that there are good solutions here that don't sacrifice the non-custodial nature of Lightning. So I think we can get there, but it definitely will take some work, and this is an active area of research for us as well as kind of many others. I know this is a popular question, so Andrew, I don't know, any questions from people on that?
Yeah, actually, there's somebody in the chat that asked this questions in regards to your demo.
Oh yeah.
Just to make, sorry about that. Just to make sure he understands it correctly, in the demo, each of the SparkSwap clients to operate were connected to a local and separate Lightning nodes for both Bitcoin and Litecoin for both Chandler and Monica. Yeah.
Let me actually go back to that. So, so I'm actually in this example, I'm SSH'd into two servers that are hosted remotely. And each one of these servers is running a Bitcoin and Litecoin Lightning node and a Bitcoin and Litecoin full node. So there's actually a lot of nodes running in this example. So each one of them has their own Bitcoin and Litecoin Lightning node, Bitcoin and Litecoin full node in order to do this. And that's, it's like sort of more complex at the service orchestration layer, but in terms of LND, it's much easier, for example, with LND to start it with Litecoin or Bitcoin than to start it with Litecoin and Bitcoin. So that's kind of the advantage of doing it that way.
Cool. Actually, can you walk me through you said that for the arbiter, one solution to the free option is to bond. And one of it is mutually insured destruction, and the other one is bonding with an arbiter.
Yeah.
So the mutually insured destruction. So if I want to swap Litecoin for Bitcoin, and then I pay the invoice, but then the Bitcoin dude decides to not pay it and kind of hold. Are you what's the time frame between that, and is it kind of basically a penalty transaction?
Yeah, you could have something set up basically where you can only get you only get the bond back if in this case if Bob reveals the preimage for the payment. So you could have some service that only gives back these payments or even some contract I'm sure you could come up with where these two parties only get their payments back if Bob reveals the preimage within a certain period of time. That's attractive because then the service that does that doesn't actually have to know anything about the payment itself. They just have to know that, okay, here's this hash and this preimage corresponds to it, and it was revealed within X amount of time. And Bob is not going to reveal it unless actually the trade completed, because otherwise he's sort of being cheated from an options perspective. So yeah, it's mutually assured destruction because this service can't know if, for example, let's say Bob's payment to Alice was for the wrong amount. And so Alice rejected it. Well, in that case, Bob was the one that misbehaved. And so we can't have a situation where Bob is always able to get his deposit back. So you have this weird, it's kind of a weird structure, and it's one that we've experimented with where either both parties get their deposit back if the trade was successful, or neither does. And the sort of thinking is that, Alice is not willing to economically harm herself, even if it also economically harms Bob, because she doesn't care that much about trolling Bob. That might be a bad assumption, but that's sort of the assumption, is that everybody, people are looking out for themselves and don't really care that much about sort of the penalties they impose on others. So they would always be looking out self-interestedly in the best way for them to get their own deposit back.
And that makes sense, especially because you mentioned, this is probably more ideal for larger payments, right? They wouldn't want to be losing a ton of money. Maybe for micro payments, it wouldn't matter as much.
Right. Yeah. So, and actually for sparkswap right now, we have transaction limits in place. There's the channel limits on Lightning. And so really the way that we manage this problem on sparkswap right now is primarily through reputation. We have an order book that we manage. And so the sort of option that you can exercise on sparkswap today is just not that valuable. An option on $500 worth of Bitcoin is just not worth that much. And so our presumption is that, people, at least in these early stages, would rather keep trading than kind of use that option. And so if people are kind of trying to exploit this free option, then, we'll have ways to basically punish them. But it's something that we want to improve over time as we kind of scale up the transactions and these options become really valuable. To actually manage this in a better way than just purely reputation.
Yeah, and some people view the American free option as a bad thing, but I think on the other hand, you can just go embrace it, right?
Right.
And then why not build a full-on derivative exchange out of it?
Right. Yeah. I think that is such a good point. Is if you could have a non-custodial options market where you can guarantee delivery, like that's great. That's amazing. That's like a huge technological breakthrough. I don't think we're there yet, but I do think that that's sort of like a future path that we or somebody else could take. I think it's a super interesting area of research.
Yeah. And so quick question about like your order book. Can anybody host an order book?
So right now, our order book code is closed source, mostly because we want liquidity to not kind of get fragmented, and we want to make sure the user experience is good. So there's kind of a lot of things we do right now to improve the user experience, including providing liquidity on Lightning for participants. It's something we'll explore as time goes on to see if it makes sense to actually open it up and have other people operate order books. But, what we don't want to happen is, basically just a competition between different relayers. We would like eventually some sort of, ideally some kind of like decentralized order book, but you make sacrifices when you do that. The price discovery is worse when you have a decentralized order book because the latency is higher. So there's always trade-offs to be made. We'll see what happens, but for us, we think the most important thing is that the actual custody of assets is it's decentralized, and the code for that is all open source. So kind of the critical stuff is open source, and our relayer is the only thing that's not open source.
Cool. So just wanted to let you know we have 5 more minutes. How do you want to proceed? Do you want to take some more questions? Do you want to finish your presentation?
I mean, that's all I have. I mean, the only last thing I'll say is if you like this stuff, if you like working on the free option problem, if you are interested in Lightning Network atomic swaps, trading, or just building Lightning Network applications, we are hiring software engineers and other roles. We don't have all of these roles posted, so if you're interested in working with us, please reach out to me. I'm on Twitter. I'm Trey at sparkswap.com is my email. So if you're interested, would love to talk to you. We're all really passionate about this stuff. That's why we're kind of here and participating. And so we want to work with other people that are passionate about this stuff too. But yeah, that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any other questions folks have.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, what would be the business revenue or model for like hosting an order book Yeah, so I mean, our business model right now is that we take fees for hosting the order book. We actually, for right now, we're not going to take fees in kind of the early days, but eventually we're going to take small fees, something comparable to regular exchanges for hosting the order book and kind of publishing those orders to people. So I think there's other things we probably could do, but for now it's sort of the easiest thing. And have you so I would imagine you could even just siphon those off by setting like high routing fees, I guess, through your node.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have to be like 2 separate invoices.
Right. That's probably what we'll end up doing, at least in the near term, just because it also makes the fees kind of a trustless fee. So yeah, that's probably what we'll end up doing.
One person from the audience is asking if you've raised money.
Stay tuned. The answer is yes, but there'll be more kind of news on that front soon.
This guy, what response from investors have you gotten? I'm sorry.
Depends on the investor. It's a good question. So this is, I like this question because I think especially for people here who are very into Bitcoin and Lightning, it's sort of, it matters a lot. So I started working on this in late 2017 before Lightning was in beta. I tried to raise money right after Lightning was in beta, and people were like, Lightning, that's the worst. It's terrible. It doesn't work. Bitcoin is over. Who cares about this stuff? And then like 6 months later, 9 months later, all of a sudden everyone's a huge Lightning fan. And, I think it's great. I think people are allowed to change their minds. But I will say, definitely interest from investors in Lightning and Bitcoin has done kind of a 180 from, a year ago. So I think, and I think that's a good thing for everybody when there's kind of money and interest to build out the infrastructure for the ecosystem.
It's funny how that works, right? Because you hear a lot of conversations from the VC world, we're looking for pioneers, people to kind of, pioneer the way. But then in this space, specifically with Bitcoin and Lightning, they're like, oh no, we don't see it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Now it's great to hear that they're kind of changing their minds.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, Trey, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
If people want to like ask you more questions or whatever, like where can they get in touch with you?
So sparkswap.com kind of has everything, but we have a Discord for SparkSwap that you can join on our website. Also, you can just email me, trey@sparkswap.com, and I'm on Twitter. At tgriff3 is my Twitter username. So feel free to find me there. I'm also in actually the Boltathon Slack, so you can just at me in there, and I'll try to respond as well. So yeah, happy to answer any questions people have. Love that.
And cool. You're actually going to be one of the judges on Sunday, right?
Yes, I am. I'm going to be one of the judges. I'm excited for that.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Thanks, Trey. Next up, we have Pierre Rochard. That'll be in about 10 minutes. So hopefully I'll see you guys then. Bye.
Thanks.